people, like, a lot of times will just be, like Derek mentioned, be so pessimistic about DAOs. And they'll be like, this is not going to work, or like they're overhyped. And like a lot of people saying this are people that just like do not participate in DAOs, period. Like they're just watching from the sidelines. And it's like, no, there's like actually really interesting work being done here. It's not perfect by any means, but like I'm very optimistic of this type of model, like actually kind of like operating these decentralized protocols and projects in the future. So like kind of hoping people will be a little bit more open to hearing more about what's happening in the DAO world.
Cliff, really excited to get this podcast series started. We've been wanting to do it for a long time, and I'm really excited about the types of guests that we've got coming on the show. Why don't you just give a brief introduction of what we're doing here at Ownership and who we've got as a guest today?
Yeah, so title of this entire podcast series is called Ownership, because we believe that everyone is truly an owner in Web3, and we want to see people continue to ship awesome goods and services, products, and dApps to promote decentralization, right? So this podcast really aims to cover all things DAOs, community governance, and what it's like to work in crypto. So I think like there are many different crypto podcast content out there, but not a lot of them have actually zoned in on actually understanding what it's like working in crypto. So hopefully this is going to be an engaging series of episodes, and hopefully we get good guests to come along. So for this pilot episode, super excited to bring on Derek from Reverie and Linda from Scalar Capital, both are big names in the space. So James, anything to add there?
No, really excited to get this one started. Maybe just the last thing is me and Cliff work at the D1DX Foundation right now. We'll be co-hosting these podcasts on an ongoing basis going forward. But I think similarly, really excited to have Linda and Derek on, really heavy hitters in the DeFi DAO governance space. And yeah, excited to get this episode started.
Awesome. Let's jump right in. Ladies first. Linda, do you mind just giving us a quick intro about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm Linda. I'm co-founder of a crypto fund called Scalar Capital. I'm also a delegate for Gitcoin, Optimism, and Element, which are also portfolio companies of ours. So it's just a way of participating in the community. And then prior to that, I was an early Coinbase employee. So I've been in the crypto space for quite a while now. And I think what really excites me is the governance side of things, because I really feel like we can recreate new systems from scratch and allow more people around the world to participate. And so I'm just particularly excited about DAOs in general.
Nice. Derek, do you mind giving a quick intro about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Derek, and thanks again, Cliff and James, for having us on, and co-founder of Reverie a year ago, and we're a company that works closely with crypto protocols and communities on a variety of things pertaining to governance, but really just spend a lot of time as a delegate and as an activist in a lot of these communities, and trying to help them operate more effectively and make better decisions on how to grow the protocol. So
we've invited both Derek and Linda just because they've been active delegates in many different protocols, and they recently released a paper on experiments in DAO governance. So do check that out on Reverie's website as well as on Linda's Mirror. Link is going to be in the show notes. It talks about all the different governance models that different protocols have embarked on. So talked about Optimism, ENS, Element Finance, and many others, of which we are going in depth into. So just for context, over on DYDX, we have a one token, one vote model. So it's really basic stuff. And it's going to be super interesting to learn more about all these different governance models and see what are some of the key challenges and benefits of each. So yeah, let's kick it off.
Sweet. Yeah, I'll kick off the first one if that's all right. Derek, Linda, we know that most protocols and DAOs operate with a kind of one token, one vote governance model, which kind of gives the ability for token holders to delegate their voting and proposing powers. I guess with your experience and how deep you've been involved with communities and governance in general, I guess what are some of the key benefits and challenges to this model? Maybe Linda, if you would go first, and then we can move on to Derek.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the model is just really simple for people to understand, and it's kind of what we've seen historically. And theoretically, it allows large holders of the token to be incentivized to actually participate. But in practice, we've seen DAOs that doesn't actually always happen. And so I definitely think there are a lot of challenges with this model. Another aspect is you also have maybe people who are really great contributors to the ecosystem who don't necessarily have a large amount of tokens themselves. or maybe aren't as known publicly, and don't have as many people delegating to them, but really deserve to have a really strong voice in the ecosystem. They're not necessarily as prominent in these kind of models. So I'm much more of a fan of experimentation and kind of getting away from this one token, one vote model. I mean, there's also like other attacks that can happen. Like you can have vote buying if somebody's really wealthy. But I still think we're still early on in like the experimentation side of things.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, that gives a lot of context. Derek, what about yourself? What's been your experience there?
Yeah, I think just to add on what Linda said, one token, one vote really is the simplest and most intuitive for people to understand. On the one hand, it's good because like it just rewards people for being economically involved, and it allows people to have direct skin in the game, the ownership to vote. And like one could argue that is like a very fair system. Yeah, on the other hand, I think there's been a lot said about many different people about the pitfalls of token holder ownership. In these systems, there's a lot of different stakeholders. Token holders are just one of them. You also have users, you might have validators, you might have developers. So you could argue that just having token governance overweights the influence of token holders. And it's something we write about in the article and go into. But I agree with Linda that I think there's a lot of room for innovation here, and there could be some room for improvement.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Cliff, you're deep in the weeds as well here. I mean, is there anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I think like just to piggyback of what Linda and Derek mentioned, it's a super simple model, but at the same time, like there are challenges, right? Like voter apathy. People are just sometimes not incentivized to vote. Will gains are real. You can easily look through a couple of votes in different protocols, and you can see like a couple of wallets can actually influence votes significantly. There's issues of vote buying. There's issues of token holders just not feeling confident or not feeling the need to even vote in the first place. So many different challenges there, and that's why like I think different protocols have embarked on exploring different models of governance, right? Just to see what might help to remedy all of these potential flaws in the one token, one vote model. And the first of many protocols that I personally super excited about is actually Optimism, right? They actually have a two-house governance model. They call it a bicameral governance model, where they have a token house as well as a citizen house. So just some context, the citizen house is kind of like focused on distributing retroactive public goods funding, and that's kind of like the whole gist behind Optimism, right? Like the whole community is behind that movement. And the token house consists of people who were airdropped the Optimism token, right? So these two different houses collectively govern the Optimism collective, and just more on the citizen house, right? Because on the token house, I think it's very similar to like many other DAOs out there or many other protocols that use the one token, one vote. But for the citizen house, it's a bit more special. So citizens in the citizen house is, correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, right? This is just based off of my research. You're an active delegate on Optimism, so you probably know a lot more. But citizens in this house, they are conferred citizenship by members of the Optimism Foundation per se, and there's a criteria set up and a special election that goes on from the token house, and citizenship is non-transferable, right? Probably through soulbound tokens, if I'm not wrong. So just a high-level overview, right? What are some of the benefits of this separation of power between the two houses, and what challenges do you guys foresee? Linda, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm really excited with this type of model. I still think there's like a lot of iterations that are going to happen along the way, and kind of taking feedback from the community. But I like that you still have the existing, token, one vote kind of model that people understand. But then the other side is trying to make sure you're bringing valuable members of the community and having a voice, and working on retroactive public goods funding. And then I love that there's also this like tie between the two houses, in that you have the token holders actually voting on a few members that will receive those non-transferable NFTs as part of the citizen house. And so you kind of have like some of them working together. And so we actually just had an election that happened for those 10 badges for the citizen house from the token house. But I still think like there are challenges with this because we talk about like, Optimism Foundation is going to be like handing some of these out. Some of these will be voted in through elections. And so you kind of still have this like issue where people who are well networked and people that are really well known end up getting these kind of badges. So it's like, the election is kind of already just like, okay, what are the names we're most familiar with? And Optimism Foundation, it's like, who do we already have existing relationships with? So I still think like early days, there's a lot to be improved there, but over time, like Optimism Foundation, they've talked about how they really envision seeing there being like thousands of these badges given out. So I'm excited to see like how that progresses.
Nice. Derek, I think like Reverie is one of the delegates in the Optimism Foundation as well. So what are your thoughts generally on this two token, this two house model?
Yeah, not quite as active as Linda, but I think it's a very interesting experiment. Like, it's a pretty simple idea, separating and directly addresses some of the concerns and pitfalls I brought up earlier around the one token, one vote model of shared token holder governance systems. And yeah, you could draw a direct analogy to how the US political system works, right? With different bodies of government responsible for different things and creating a bit of a checks and balance. So I think in practice, let's see how Optimism governance plays out. It's still very early, but I think it represents a pretty neat way of implementing a basic checks and balances system that makes sure that one entity or one small set of people does not dominate the conversation.
No, nice. Yeah, I think like on the token house, there's evidently a strong emphasis on delegates, and yeah, you mentioned both you are pretty active in that space, Linda more so you, and in your personal capacity. I guess for you, with the kind of changes in the token house, how has your delegate experience changed thus far, and potentially how does these houses sort of incentivize maybe members of the community to want to become delegates and contribute, I don't know, in a greater capacity per se?
Yeah, the whole like Optimism governance process has definitely been like a journey because there's been a lot of iterations from when it started. One thing that I really love is the Optimism Foundation is really involved in the process and like participates and receives feedback and tries to improve things and like kind of get consensus from the community. So that I see is like a little bit different than some of the other DAOs because you actually have this like active participant. And so they'll have after like voting periods, they'll have reflection periods where it's like, okay, what went wrong in this past voting period? What can we improve? And then the next season you go into it with those changes, always bearing in mind that this is an experiment and let's just see how it goes. And so we've improved a lot since we first launched. And I think one thing I really appreciate about the community is that there's actually compensation in the system. So delegates were retroactively paid for the work that they did as delegates. And when you sign up to be a committee member, which is kind of just a more specialized group that does like more frequent grant reviews, you actually get paid for this work. And so there is an incentive for delegates to be very active and participate and like actually, in my opinion, levels a playing field for people to participate who might otherwise not be able to. So I'm a big fan of that kind of setup. And then we also just have like the entire community call they're hosted by volunteers. So people just kind of rotate around. They're like, I'll host this week. And it's just a very like active community that I've appreciated. And it's also like very diverse too, because you have like DeFi, NFTs, tooling, like more the technical side. And so it's just like people from all over. And I think it's probably the most diverse group that I've worked with, I would say. But then I would say like some of the issues have been definitely when we started, every delegate had to vote on everything. And so it was just so exhausting because you had all of these like different areas that you had to cover. It was just really overwhelming and frankly got very political too, because it's like, this really public facing project is not getting a grant. And all of a sudden some of the delegates that voted no and influenced that decision. So it really started becoming political. So, the Optimism Foundation added some more like kind of community guidelines and code of conduct during the process. So I'd say that was probably my biggest struggle in the beginning was kind of some of the tension that got created.
No, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, Cliff, you're as well kind of really passionate about that ecosystem. I mean, has there been anything specific that you've seen that you've liked in terms of the model, in terms of the process? in terms of like lessons learned from your side of things?
Yeah, I think like to Derek and Linda's point, it's a very interesting experiment to kind of like continue to watch out on. And something that I'm super impressed by is their delegate experience, right? So I believe like the entire Optimism collective has really zoned in on delegation and putting voting and proposal powers into the hands of people who actually know their stuff, being delegates. So if you go to like the Optimism's governance or rather delegation page as a brand new token holder, you actually get to sort what you're interested in, indicate what you're interested in, and it kind of like directs you to the delegates that kind of aligns with you. So I think like from a UX standpoint, it's really great from the everyday token holder to know exactly who aligns with your values, who you can kind of like sync with the most, and potentially like delegate to them. Helps with like delegate diversity as well, instead of always the same few people just getting the delegated powers. So yeah, I think like that's something that is a good thing for every other protocol that wants to zone in on delegation to kind of learn from, really honing in on the entire delegate experience of it, right? But something that Linda brought up earlier is that in the early days, like voting, probably delegates had to vote on every single topic that comes up, every single proposal that comes up, whether it's in the NFTs space or whether it's in the DeFi space or whether it's on general tooling, right? And we're all people, and people just are not subject matter experts in everything. So I can see like there being like potential delegate burnout, especially if there isn't like a compensation model behind, which I didn't know about, Linda. So thanks for like giving us that background. So yeah, I think like speaking about compensation, I think like on Element Finance, you both actually mentioned in the paper that they have a governance steering committee, council in place, a GSC, where membership is kind of like made up of members with at least 110,000 tokens delegated to them, or roughly 0.9% of the circulating supply. And each member only has one vote as compared to like your number of tokens equals to the number of your votes. And token holders actually can vote to override the GSC members at any time to maintain like this balance, so that the largest token holders don't always have the most controlling powers. So just based on this study, what are some of the main benefits of this council model? Derek, can I go to you first on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a lot of different like types of councils and committees being formed in governance. I think the general theme is, hey, like it's not efficient or logical for every single little decision to go through a governance vote for what can be a mundane or basic task or a very small treasury spend. And that's why I think like grants programs exist. That's why there's multi-sigs. That's why there's committees. And yeah, I think the element approach is to basically have not formal elections like other DAOs, but to just have allow token holders to make the choice through fluid delegation. They can delegate or undelegate to anyone at any given time. And if a delegate has more than a specific percentage of all tokens, then they're automatically part of the Element Council. And the Element Council doesn't actually have that many abilities, but what it does have is the ability to make proposals with a lower threshold of tokens. And I believe there was some talk about the ability to spend small amounts from the treasury, but I'm not actually sure if that's live yet. But I overall, I think the Element team is really thoughtful in their approach. Some of the Element team members were original folks from the MakerDAO team, and MakerDAO really was the first DeFi protocol to launch any form of governance at all. So they basically taken the lessons and experience from that and improved on it through Element. So very excited about what they're doing.
Nice. And it kind of seems like the Element Finance community is supportive of compensation models, right, for members of the GSC through Alpha tokens, even though it's not liquid yet. But it seems like there is an agreed upon framework that rewards higher levels of involvement. So we've seen other protocols like Synthetics and MakerDAO and, to Linda's point, Optimism as well, compensate their council members and recognize delegates respectively. So Generally, Linda, what are your thoughts on like compensating high quality contributors, and what should be the mental model that communities have when thinking about compensation?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of compensation. I mean, just having participated myself in these, it's a lot of hours, and it's just also a lot of drama and headache sometimes too, honestly. And I'm doing this as part of like supporting the portfolio companies, so it's like this is part of my job. But like others who have full-time jobs elsewhere, where this is something they're doing on the side, like they're doing so much work, and they really should be compensated for it. I do think that I like that idea of retroactive rewards that Optimism did, because like you can really see who actually contributed and was actually a productive member. And so I think there should be some element, maybe like a base compensation model off the start that kind of can provide people some compensation for their time, but then like really reward those that were the most active. And then Gitcoin has the concept of like steward health cards, so steward being their delegate system. And so you can kind of see like participation rates, like how active you were in the forums. They started incorporating factors like, are you joining community calls that we have, like steward calls that we have? And so kind of using these metrics as some way of informing how much addition that people should get compensated, or how good they are in terms of participation. So I like kind of just thinking through making sure that there's a very gameable, by the way, but making sure that you have some like retroactive reward system as well.
Okay, so are you more of a fan of like doing compensation on a retroactive basis, or rather like having a framework that says like, okay, if you do this amount of work, then you are going to be rewarded with a certain number of tokens, and if you do more hours or more projects, or if you vote more, then you can automatically qualify for a high level of rewards?
I mean, I don't think there's any right answer, and every community is going to be different. Everybody who participates is going to have different requirements. But I do think that there should be some base up front so people can get compensated. But I also think that there's a lot of people that commit to do things that don't follow through on it. And we need to have some version of accountability for it, right? So I like this, like, maybe an idea of like a bonus that we just have in traditional corporate system, but something needs to align with like what was your actual output.
Yeah, because the issue with like retroactively compensating these contributors is that contributors might have that some expectation of how much they're going to get, and like if they actually get lesser than what they expected, then they might be jaded, and like they might stop, or they might lower their levels of contribution moving forward. So
this wouldn't be like here's a punishment. This would be like here's like additional amounts that you get rewarded for, or like here are milestones that you hit and you get additional amounts for it. So I definitely don't believe in like a punishment system, but I believe in like rewarding those that contributed.
Right. Got it. Derek, any thoughts?
It would be interesting. No, I was just going to say, it would be interesting to see a governance slashing mechanism that would be a very strong incentive to vote, right? It's like if you literally don't vote, you can abstain even, but if you don't do anything, then like repeatedly, then maybe there's a penalty. But I agree, in practice, it's much better to incentivize and reinforce positive behavior. So,
but I'm for experimentation, so that would be fun to try out.
Yeah. No, I mean, Linda, I think we do. I mean, I think you and I know this well directly, right? Like even things like multi-sigs, if people are not incentivized or if there's no accountability, like something that takes as little as 5 minutes could take days or even weeks. So it's like, if that becomes challenging, how is it possible to think about how difficult it is to do more complex things that aren't yes, no, anything subjective, anything related to product? And I think there's solutions, obviously, and but I think it isn't easy.
Cliff's the one who's been rogue so far.
Oh yeah, Cliff is frozen. So
yeah, I think it's what you were saying super interesting. Like I think from what like some community members feel is a really basic task, like in the reality of things, it's extremely cumbersome, and yet that's sort of like the minimal threshold to actually get you involved and active in the system. And then to make sure that someone has full context, actually has the quality and skill to respond and be active and answer questions and have the the full context behind decisions or a proposal that's come up, it takes a significant amount of time, and incentivizing them sort of non-financially is a really tough task, and you can't expect people to essentially give their best and ability to contribute, and at the same time, you do need to, I think, long term offer something reward wise, whether that's compensation financially or another thing. You're back. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, James, you touched on an important point, and I think the incentives part is so important. And while I do agree financial incentives are critical, like I also feel the most successful DAOs and the most successful communities they have to build an ecosystem of people that aren't just motivated by financial incentives. They have to feel that they feel some sort of tie or attachment beyond the economic motive. I think with and the most original and obvious examples would be in Bitcoin, people that ran nodes, right, to improve the decentralization of the network, to add to the overall resiliency. Like, there really isn't a direct economic reason to do that, because you could just be a miner and make money, or you could just be a user of Bitcoin or holder. But to run nodes, I think is a bit more, not entirely, but a bit more altruistic. And I think of DAOs and governance the same way. Like, there's contributions that some kinds of contributions that there have to be people that just step up and just some sort of ownership. So I think a combination of financial incentives and organic goodwill is the optimal mix.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. Appreciate it. Cliff, is there anything else you want to add? I don't think you missed that much, pretty much. Just me rambling on a little bit. Anything you want to move on to next?
Yeah, I think next on the list we have Lido, right? So Lido, obviously, they're the biggest ETH stakers around, and they've recently introduced this dual Lido and stETH governance structure that kind of allows stake ETH holders staking on Lido to veto certain governance decision. I honestly don't know what to think about that, but it essentially creates a check on Lido holders' governance powers and ensures that the different protocol stakeholders have direct input into the governance process. So obviously this isn't live yet, but what are some of your thoughts around this model? Linda, do you want to go first?
I think Derek is expert here, but the only thing I will add is I am generally a fan of checks and balances. I think that is absolutely a great thing in the system. And then I'll just pass it over to Derek.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think the discussion, I think this is probably the most interesting example of really checks and balance, because the downside is so big, right? Lido, the impact of Lido is huge at this point. I don't know the exact amount, but it holds an enormous amount of stakes.
Crazy, yeah.
And all ETH in existence. And if it continues to, it's plateaued a little bit recently. Exchanges and Marketable have run market share, but if Lido continues on its trajectory, it will own, an enormous amount of the network. And Lido is currently at, I don't know the current price, but it's in the single-digit billions market cap. So you could have, let's just say Lido's $2, you could have this $2 billion asset that controls and governs tens or hundreds of billions of dollars in ETH. And in the most theoretical downside scenario, those Lido holders could vote on just removing the ETH from the validators and sending it back to themselves, Lido holders. I think practically speaking, there's a lot of reasons that wouldn't happen, but it is a theoretical attack, and it's unlikely. But I think it's a very valid concern if you're an ETH user and an ETH staker. So I think, following that discussion was super interesting, and a lot of ETH developers chimed in, and core devs, and I think it just shows that if something is working and the downside is there, the need for checks and balances is enormous. So I think, I think the Lido team's doing a good job, just being open-minded with that feedback and getting ahead of it, because frankly, if they didn't implement some of these systems and check and balances, you probably see prominent voices in the youth community and others like just want people not to use Lido just because of the attack. So I think it's for Lido's own good that LDO holders don't have the ability to perform some of these theoretical attacks.
That's crazy. And hopefully the upcoming Shanghai hard fork is going to help. Hopefully people are going to... sorry, this is not going to be like a personal shill or what, but I'm a bigger fan of like rocket pool. So yeah, hopefully like it kind of helps the diversity between the stakers, and yeah, hopefully we will see less dominance from Lido moving forward. Cool. James, do you want to touch on ENS really quickly?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we know now that I think ENS is working with Metropolis, which were formerly as Orca, and I know you guys are close there, to establish the governance pods, which are essentially smaller working groups which specialize in specific areas like DAO ops, protocols, security, etc., community and public goods. I guess this model is similar to what the DYDX DAO is looking to explore, and Derek, as you know, we're in the midst of launching the second sub-DAO, which is going to look after the operations of the larger DAO. Personally, I think I'm a fan of this approach, as I believe it does allow for more competent and efficient governance. I guess what are your thoughts on or around this model, as opposed to having, say, token holders and or delegates vote on every single proposal? Maybe Derek, as I know you're close there first. Like, any thoughts on that model specifically?
Yeah, I think like big fan of Orca protocol. I think like they've been like from very early on. I think they predicted this trend and built a product specifically to make decision making in DAOs easier. So I think they've been thought leaders for the past really 2 years on DAO governance, and I personally haven't been as following the ENS stuff as closely as Linda, but I think pods are a great tool, and I think that this is literally Orca's entire point, right? To make decision making easier and more efficient. So I think ENS is a cool example. But yeah, Linda, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, I thought you covered it well. I think one thing I would add separately is one thing I like about Metropolis, formerly known as Orca, is that they allow you to delegate to a group, and then that group is can change over time, but you don't have to like delegate, undelegate, redelegate to a different person. And so, like, for example, it's like you're delegating to blockchain at Berkeley, and they like obviously are made up of a bunch of students who then rotate out, and I think it just creates a more efficient process, because I'm kind of in the situation these days where I kind of like eventually I will not want to be a delegate, forever, and I would have to ask people to undelegate and redelegate, and that's an on-chain action, and you're asking a lot from people. And so I kind of like this model where you can just kind of like have these groups change themselves over time and move things off-chain.
Nice. And I think obviously with like smaller sub-DAOs or smaller pods coming into play here, there might be a higher level of potentially centralization and a higher degree of off-chain governance. So how can communities ensure that these groups of subject matter experts or councils on each of their specific pods be held accountable?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just have to also have ways of voting people out and just regular checks on updates on what the group is doing. So I think an example would be Gitcoin. So Gitcoin's been operating or Gitcoin DAO has been operating for almost 2 years now, and we're far into the workstream model, so very similar to these pods, like committees, like small working groups. And every quarter so far, they've had to publish their OKRs and how like close they were to achieving them, how well they did, and then like kind of ask for their next set of funding. There's a lot of challenges with this process as well, because people are getting paid quarter by quarter, and there's like uncertainty. So I think there's things that can be improved here, but there's this accountability, because like delegates aren't going to be continuing to fund these working groups if they're not actually being productive and using the funds well. And you actually see in the forums, like, delegates are really involved in being like, well, you're asking for this amount for this specific thing for next quarter. like, is this actually necessary? This feels kind of like a nice to have, or can we just focus on, the key deliverable here? And so I like that process, is you just kind of have these like regular checks of accountability, and then ways of just voting people out or stopping a funding process. And again, everything's always a balance. You don't want to be too restrictive on them as well, because you want people to have freedom to be able to like evolve and change as things go along.
Appreciate it. Derek, any inputs there?
Yeah, I think it really just starts with, I think, communication and like having some way of regularly seeing what's going on, either on a weekly or a monthly cadence, being available to feedback, to answering questions that people have, and being evaluated. I think that's super important. So yeah, I think those are some of the things that can make the process easier.
Yeah, I think like over on the DYDX side, it's pretty interesting to see like how this model kind of plays out as well. Again, I think like we subscribe to, having subject matter experts on specific smaller working groups really make decisions. So, we have more competent and efficient governance. But again, like this whole experiment is new as well. And we'll all, I guess, learn along the way.
Awesome.
James, you want to talk about nouns really quickly?
Yeah, I mean, kind of lastly, guys, I guess nouns are typically out there in terms of, like, from a brand and social standpoint, they seem to have built like really solid fundamentals with kind of noun owners. I guess for you guys, like, what are some of the characteristics like the community has built up that have really led to that success? They seem to be attracting really prominent names in the space. Personally excited about the path they're going down. They use the kind of one noun, one vote model per se, but anything that you think from a characteristic standpoint that have really led to this uprise over the last year or so?
Yeah, I think I've had a lot of conversations with folks about nouns, and I think there's a lot of angles to talk about it from. The most obvious one is most of governance today is, when we talk about it, is about these DeFi systems, and the governance decisions are around things like treasury spend and risk parameter adjustments. And for some of these proposals, for a lot of them, there's a lot of funds involved, there's a lot of downside, and the discussion gets pretty, there's just high stakes, right? Like, there's billions of dollars on Aave today. If you get a parameter recommendation wrong, such as we've seen, there's enormous downsides, and these discussions are just really serious. With nouns is kind of the complete opposite of that. It's intentionally a complete, by their own branding and marketing, it's like an experimental place for people for any person to build up the nouns meme through arts, through media, through marketing. And the DAO as a whole is just philosophically very open to funding, supporting, and growing these approaches. So a lot of people that want to learn more about governance to get involved in a DAO, it's so much easier to feel like a part of the community in nouns and start getting funded and work for the DAO versus something like MakerDAO, where you have to go through 6 different governance calls, a 6-month process to get funded, and face hundreds of questions from other MakerDAO employees. It's just a different, and that might be good for MakerDAO, but it does make it challenging for new people to enter. And I think that's a big reason we're seeing a lot of excitement and interest from nouns. Is just it's new and it makes it very easy for people to onboard, which I think is really important.
Yeah, not gonna lie, for MakerDAO, it's so intimidating to just get started, right? They have so many threads, and it seems like there are already a lot of big names in the space. So it feels like if you're a newcomer, you get easily shut down, and just the mere thought of that might hold a lot of talents back, right? So yeah, I think personally super excited for what Nouns has to bring to the table as well. It's super easy to get into the ecosystem. You literally just have to get a noun and you're part of it. You can request funding if your project's solid, and yeah, I think it's a new paradigm of working in a, I wouldn't say in a low commitment fashion, but it's just easier to get into Web3 in general. And yeah, personally super excited about what that brings. Linda, any thoughts on nouns?
I mean, I guess, so I think Nouns is awesome, and from what I've seen and heard, it seems like a really great experiment, and I guess, like, one thing I do wonder is, like, at what point does it become difficult to scale in that way? So I think, like, Nouns model works really well for a certain size community, and I just don't know what that threshold is. So, like, it is one of those things, because I always, like, in a lot of governance discussions, I hear people saying, like, oh, like, we should consider this, like, Nouns model for this, and it's, like, maybe a much larger DAO. And so I think, like, as we talk about these different governance models, it's really dependent on, like, the size, culture, like, what they're working on and things like that.
That makes sense. There is, like, obviously with Nouns as well, it's not easy to get in a sense from, like, a costing standpoint for, say, the average community member that has just come in, right? I think to like get one, to mint one, in a sense, it's, I don't know what the cost is now, but I remember kind of 6+ months ago it was significant, and the average person can't afford, I guess, to be a part of that community. In a sense, it is exclusive, serious, but additionally it makes it fun, right? I mean, I think everyone sees what's going on there, and it creates some, like, you know, you have that feeling of, oh, you definitely want to be involved regardless of what's happening, just because it's got that sort of hype behind it, and how they built that cycle up, which has been really interesting. Yeah, nothing else from me, Cliff. Anything
Awesome.
from you?
Yeah, I think, like, we've covered all the different protocols that were covered in the paper, and just some, like, more general questions, right? So, like, throughout DAO and DeFi land, obviously, both Derek and Linda, you both have studied many different governance models. Are either of you convinced that there is a blanket approach to governance for all DAOs and communities? And if not, is there a framework that kind of states that, like, you know, if your DAO or your protocol does DeFi or does this, then this governance model would suit you best. And if your DAO does B, then governance model B would suit you best. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't think there is a uniform approach to governance. It's kind of like asking if there's an optimal way to structure like a company. Like there's a certain number of tools that are available, and it's really up to you, to like the company's founder or the community or whatever, to decide which of those rules to use and how to use them. So I don't think there's one size fits all, and I think across the board, like, it's honestly difficult for me to point to a lot of DAOs today and say that they're working well. So I think we're very early, and there's a lot of room for iteration and change. In general, though, I think most DAOs in the last 2-3 years that have spun up have sort of started at like the maximally decentralized angle, where it's like they launch with on-chain governance and the set of things that token holders can do, and just be like, okay, like, do something. And there's all this missing infrastructure that's being built back up, such that people are now realizing is missing, like multi-sigs, like committees, like councils, like checks and balances, and those are the things that, right, like a standard LLC or C corp provides. And I don't think, like, we're not here to recreate this LLC or the C corp, and it'd frankly be pretty sad if we just ended up with all of those same existing rules. But I do think we are picking and choosing as an industry, as a community of DAOs, like, which ones are useful depending on your organization type. So I think that's where that's what's interesting about this. That's why I'm spending a lot of time in DAO governance, is I think there's a big design space, and traditional organizations do some things well, but some things poorly. So let's take the ones that work well and borrow them, and use the new things that are working well.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I just generally really don't like blanket models or statements for anything, because like at the end of the day, especially in these DAOs, like, you're dealing with people, so lots of different cultures, lots of different languages, countries, like, and so I think that the community themselves needs to, like Derek was saying, like, look at these different types of experiments that are happening and kind of take ones that would work for them and test it out. And part of why we wrote that post was just kind of like bringing together some of these experiments happening to light, and so people can kind of be more aware and dig deeper if they were interested. So yeah, but of course there's like just best practices in general of like, how do you kind of get a group to be cohesive. So it's like ideally having a mission or something that everyone can align on, having values in the community. So I think those kind of things generally are like, you can kind of carry over from company cultures to DAOs.
Nice. I think last few things then, last couple of quick fire questions, I guess. Derek, one for you first. What are you excited about when it comes to governance in general? Are there any specific models that you're particularly bullish on going forward?
I think the one thing that's been most exciting is just the increase in participants. Like, I think a year and a half ago, like, there were very few like full-time delegates in this space. I think now, off the top of my head, there's a bunch. There are very few DAO providers or companies that could go through governance and help these protocols. I think now there's a ton in a bunch of different areas. We've seen companies like Coinbase do enormous deals through governance. Like, imagine telling someone 2 years ago that. So I think it's easy to be pessimistic, just because there is a lot of room for improvement, but at the same time, we have come a really long way. And I think it's safe to say that governance is no longer a toy. Like, a year and a half ago, it kind of looked like a toy still. People weren't sure how to engage or interact with it, but now I think every crypto company is paying attention to governance. So let's begin to cover governance proposals and stories. So I think this is just an obvious trend to me, and part of why we're spending a lot of time in governance, because I think it's every company, every protocol will just need to go through governance to do important things, and it's a fun area to be involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. Linda?
What I'm excited by is, like, first of all, I really enjoy getting to work with people like all over the world who just like would never have worked with otherwise. So there's people who, like, you can't even employ them because like they've made so much money in crypto and they're just like doing this because they care about the project. There's also, like, I work with like teenagers. I work with like people who, like, this is straight up their first job they've ever had. And so it's just really fun because it's just like such a different group of people that you would just only have in a DAO. Like some of them could never get visas, working in a company in the US or something. So I really appreciate that aspect of it, because it just also levels the playing field of like everyone being able to participate if they're really passionate about this. And the other thing that I'm really excited by governance is specific experimentation. And so, like, the benefit is that you can iterate really quickly. Like in Optimism, like every season we're changing and improving how this process is going. Whereas, like, if you were to bring that to, let's like say the US government, like if you can imagine just like tweaking one little thing, like how much work and bureaucracy that would involve and how much chaos that would create. So like I really love that we can just like have all these like tiny little experiments super quick and see what works, what doesn't. And just kind of take the best versions of them and kind of improve our existing system. So that's kind of what I'm here for. I think that it's like in the next few years, it's going to be like super exciting.
Nice. Closing question for the both of you. What are some of the key takeaways and lessons you both like to share from this paper?
I think I shared a bunch already. The main ones I would talk about, but one I would just add is, I think there's a lot of mind share. There's a lot of like really smart, talented people thinking about how to make these systems work better. And I think it's very likely we'll look back in a few years and just, I think appreciate the work that went into it and some of the mistakes that we all made. But I'm confident that, like, be proud of just where this all ends up in the next few years. So.
Yeah, agreed. I like, for me, I just wanted people to be comfortable with experimentation. Like, some things are going to fail and not work out, but it's okay because we're all trying to improve this process in the long run. And I think another thing that would be nice is, I don't know, just hoping there'd be more discussion of people just sharing what they've learned. And kind of sometimes these DAOs can be really siloed with their own communities. And so kind of having more discussion on like, what is everyone else doing? Let's kind of chat about this and learn from it. And I'd say like another last thing is people like a lot of times will just, like Derek mentioned, be so pessimistic about DAOs. And they'll be like, this is not going to work, or like they're overhyped. And like a lot of people saying this are people that just like do not participate in DAOs, period. Like they're just watching from the sidelines. And it's like, no, there's like actually really interesting work being done here. It's not perfect by any means, but like I'm very optimistic of this type of model, like actually kind of like operating these decentralized protocols and projects in the future. So like kind of hoping people will be a little bit more open to hearing more about what's happening in the DAO world.
There we have it. Thank you both so much. So in closing, none of this has been financial advice. Obviously, crypto is risky and you can lose what you put in, so please do your own research. Web3 is young, we're still really, really early, and obviously all of us can't wait to see you own your own data, your own assets, join communities, participate in governance, and continue to ship ideas to promote decentralization. Thanks, everyone.